We're live.
Okie dokie. Gotta do share. Okay, hello. 7 February. This and that. Later tonight there will be Twilight Zone. Today on this and that, I'm just going to read from a working paper series symposium on new directions in money, finance, and public policy. Um, Reviving Value Theory, and it's by L. Randall Wray. Of the Levy Economics Institute, among other places. And the point is, this is the kind of core of MMT, that is modern money theory, which for some folks is at least the way in which heterodox economics or post Keynesian economics can remain viable without being sort of red baited by a variety of folks. And it shouldn't be problematic, but there are definite divisions within the profession. This paper argues that heterodox economists should put more emphasis on value theory in their analysis. While value is generally associated with price and thus indirectly with the value of money, this paper adopts the approach recommended by Robert Heilbroner. The general problematic of value is the effort to tie the surface phenomena of economic life to some inner structure or order. Money's value is not what it can purchase, nor is it simply derived from the labor embodied in the commodity used as money. And that's pretty clear. In fact, the sign of money is quite problematic, particularly in the age of financialization. Anyway, as Heilbroner put it, value theory is indispensable for understanding how the capitalist system, largely guided by price stimuli, tends towards some kind of determinate outcome. This paper will synthesize contributions of Duncan Foley, David Graeber on the labor theory of value, Hyman Minsky's approach to the relation between prices and production and allocation of the surplus, and the modern money approach, MMT, approach to the role of the state in the monetary system to demonstrate how value theory sheds light on the capitalist system, which is fundamentally a monetary system of production. You just don't see Marx talking about it in that particular way, and perhaps that's the frame within which most left, and I guess in the 21st century you could call it a new left theory, can be presented. So, section 1, reviving value theory. What is value? What is its link to money and price? Before proceeding, this paper will examine what economists mean by value theory. Neoclassical economics adopts a utility theory of value, although its perceived importance has faded. Marxists and some others adopt a labor theory of value. Institutionalists adopt a instrumental theory of value, but most heterodox economists, and indeed most economists in general, do not seem to consider value theory very important. Most heterodox economists are united in their belief that money is important in the capitalist economy, but to the extent that money has value, for many, its value is related to, determined by, or is even the same thing as prices of both output and of financial assets or debts. Orthodoxy distinguishes value, that is utility, from relative price, but there is no objective measure of value as utility is subjective. Nominal price, in turn, simply measures relative price in terms of money, but has no importance in equilibrium. Money itself has no value. It's neutral, at least in the long run. So first, this paper will try to detangle value from price. Modern economics began as an exercise in moral philosophy, and outside economics, as David Graeber argues, the late David Graeber, the concept of value is closely connected to normative concepts such as what is meaningful, desirable, or worthwhile. Within capitalist societies, the word value is normally invoked to refer to all those domains of human action that are not governed by the laws of the market. Thus, we hear about family values, spiritual values, values in the domains of art and political ideals. In other words, values began precisely where economic value ends. Early economics used ideas such as intrinsic worth and just, fair price. Today, as discussed below, discussion of value is largely relegated to social spheres other than economics. And indeed, most economists would probably agree that good economics is value free in the sense that it's objective and not normative. However, the goal of economics has long been more than to produce a theory of price. It has been to understand the workings of any system of exchange, including free market capitalism, as part of larger systems of meaning, one containing conceptions of what the cosmos is ultimately about and what is worth pursuing in it. Such systems of meaning meant that the kind of moral and ethical questions that Aquinas or Smith felt were at the heart of the matter could not simply be pushed aside. As Heilbronner put it, the general problematic of value, as I see it, is the effort to tie the surface phenomena of economic life to some inner structure or order. This problem arises because economics is unavoidably involved in two intimately related but essentially distinct tasks. One of these is the investigation of various empirical aspects of the process of social provisioning. Equally necessary for the existence of what we call economic thought is a level of abstract inquiry, an inquiry directed not at the facts of economic life, but at some structure or principle behind, quote unquote, the facts. It necessarily looks beyond appearances for essences. Economics now becomes an inquiry into the systemic properties, the structural attributes, the tendencies, and sometimes even the telos of the provisioning process. Economists have variously sought laws of the behavior of individuals, that is, utility maximization or rationality, or of the system, a law of the system, the laws of motion, that is, forces that lead to a general equilibrium. Given the importance of prices in a capitalist system, they have been the focus of economists of all traditions. Value theory is therefore indispensable for understanding how the capitalist system, largely guided by price stimuli, tends towards some kind of determinate outcome. Heilbronner quotes an insightful thought experiment proposed by Adolf Lowe. Suppose that a universal amnesia were to wipe out the knowledge of all present prices, would there be a rule for reestablishing them? Most economists would presumably answer in the affirmative once theory of value informs their beliefs about how the deep structure of the economic system would restore a system of prices. In orthodoxy, money plays no important role in those processes. Prices are relative, that is, relative measures of scarcity. However, in most heterodoxy, money plays a role beyond that of a medium of exchange, although exactly what roles it plays varies across traditions. For at least some, money is part of that deep structure of the capitalist system. Let me break here for a moment and see that there is a contrast between the surface structure and the deep structure of the capitalist system, and we're always sort of confronting that. As Heilbronner explains, money is central to the internal logic. The drive to amass capital in money form is the single most important element of the system. It is what makes capitalism truly different and to a great extent makes it possible to examine capitalism as an economic system that is somewhat disembedded from the social system as a whole, operating according to a logic that is capable of economic analysis. Social theory has two distinct approaches to society. The first begins by imagining some social system or structure, a society, a world system, and then trying to understand how it is maintained and reproduced over time. The other approach to society starts with individual actors pursuing something and sees society largely as the effect of their actions. Here, economics and its derivatives, like rational choice theory, have been the paradigm. The individualist rational choice theoretic begins with the utility maximizer who takes prices as given data. An invisible hand then produces a harmonious outcome at the aggregate level. In the orthodox tradition, the claim is that economics is value free and there's no standard of justice outside the market itself. Economics is therefore above morality. Value is price that efficiently allocates scarce resources among alternative competing uses. All factors of production get their just rewards. No, this paper will not go through the utility theory of value, except to know that it is based on subjective utility generated in use. Also, that there's indifference built into it. But anyway, the following sections turn to alternatives to the utility theory of value. The heterodox approach generally, but not always, begins with macro forces, outcomes, and constraints within which individuals make decisions. Values, in the general sense of that term, are important. And for some of these approaches, value in the specific sense of economic value that structures the systemic properties of the capitalist system is the basis for analysis. Number two, Marxian approaches. There are two competing Marxian approaches to the value of money. This is Foley's position. The first interprets Marx as arguing that the labor hours required to produce the commodity money determines the value of money. Hence, money is just like any other commodity produced by labor. Now, while there's evidence to support this interpretation, it conflicts with other discussions by Marx. Further, with the abandonment of gold standards, that is, standard monetary standards based on gold, and the limited use of them throughout money's history, this would be problematic when it comes to so-called fiat money systems. For those reasons, this contribution will focus on the second of Marx, that is, money's value is determined by socially necessary labor time, not at the level of production of any particular commodity, but rather at the aggregate level. He's just trying to save himself some effort here to have to go plow through the other version. Nor is money's value determined in an inverse way by price of output. Labor value does not equal price, and indeed, labor values must deviate from prices, and this is the transformation problem. Whether or not this was really Marx's view is really not important, as Foley argues, as Duncan Foley argues in his 83 text. Marx, like other classical economists, had trouble conceiving of abstract properties such as money as a pure measure of abstract value. He may have believed that one commodity must take on the role of measuring and expressing value, even if it was not consistent with his general argument. Like the classicals and neoclassicals, that method begins with a non-monetary economy and tries to find a logic for the use of money. And I assume this is David Levine's work of 1983, which is really good, and very few people read it. It does talk, it configures the Marxist argument in a very different way in terms of the construction of wealth over history. But anyway, since in that logic, the use of money comes out of pre-existing commodity relations. One commodity becomes money simply to resolve a problem. That is the double coincidence of wants. But as Levine argues, production for market exchange already presumes specialization and separation of producer from consumer, and that would have been far too risky in the absence of markets and money. Production for market is commodity production and requires a system of commodity relations with an external measure of value. Now, while a single commodity can be valuable to satisfy an individual need, for relative values, one needs to measure in terms of something that's not a commodity. One needs a universal measure of value. Now, money is the external measure of value and has no value itself in terms of satisfying individual needs. It's kind of, I suppose you could eat dollar bills, but whatever. As possible to come up with an assumption required to ensure that values can be transformed directly into prices. In the general case, labor values must deviate from prices. The most important reason is that prices need to redistribute surplus value to equalize profit rates on capital as a trend, not necessarily at any given point in time, which causes price to deviate from value because labor capital ratios vary across firms. In addition, market pricing power, as well as what Minsky called business style, varies across firms and sectors. See below. Such a view, of course, informs neoclassical theory and its focus on money as a medium of exchange. Or, in Levine's view, money is value, emancipated from individual needs. Similarly, Foley argues that money is an expression of abstract labor, and we've discussed that before. It is not derived from a commodity. Indeed, the source of money is actually credit. Money is the unit in which promises to pay are measured. This stands classical economics on its head. First, there are debt relations denominated in a money of account, and then a commodity markets with prices set also in terms of the money of account. At the aggregate level, money value exactly measures the aggregate of labor value, and money value is the only pure form of value that one can observe. Labor values are preserved in exchange, but exchange occurs at money prices. Money prices redistribute value to equalize money profit rates across processes with different organic compositions of capital. While all value is created by labor, money values drive production decisions. Production starts with money to end up with more money later. Money value of profits is the only measure of success from the point of view of capitalists that organize production. Foley presents the labor theory of value as the claim that the money value of the whole mass of net production of commodities expresses the expenditure of the total social labor in a commodity producing economy. A unit of money in this approach can be thought of as a claim to a certain amount of the abstract social labor expended in the economy. Money itself has that kind of sort of position in terms of money markets, but anyway, that's another thing. However, money prices for individual commodities are not equal to the money equivalent of the embodied labor value. Any particular commodity can be seen as embodying a certain fraction of the total abstract social labor expended in producing commodities. It also exchanges for a certain amount of money, its price, which represent a possibly different fraction of the abstract social labor expended. Money prices cover wages, non-wage costs, plus profits. The money price of a commodity less the non-wage costs is the value added to the commodity in production. The non-wage cost is Marx's constant capital. Remember, we talked about that, constant and variable capital. The non-wage cost is Marx's constant capital. The wage cost, as opposed to the non-wage cost, is variable capital. And the profit is surplus value or unpaid labor value. Like Keynes, Foley adjusts measured labor time to correct for differences in the intensity of work, the skill of workers, and the relation of the technique of production to the current social standard. That is, he uses simple, abstract, socially necessary labor. The value of money is then defined as the ratio of aggregate labor time to aggregate money value added. All value is created in production is conserved in the sphere of circulation at the aggregate level. However, at the individual firm level, money revenue deviates from its labor value equivalent as surplus value is redistributed. So note the similarity to Sraffa's remark above, that is that money is the standard in which debts are written. But this is also the modern money theory view discussed next. See, this is where the whole idea of the sort of extending one component of neo-Cartesianism goes. Only living labor produces surplus value. The money price system redistributes surplus value to processes with high capital labor ratios, that is, dead labor to living labor ratios. In other words, firms with high capital ratios will need higher money prices relative to the value of labor embodied in the commodities produced. Note the similarity to Minsky's argument, that is, high capital ratios require higher profits to validate the investment. And there's a little note here about money value added, etc., from Keynes. The level of the money wage is taken to be the cost of the socially determined standard for subsistence of workers. At the aggregate level, profits are proportional to aggregate unpaid labor time, although individual prices can deviate from labor value to redistribute. Thus, in general, the price of any commodity multiplied by the value of money as defined here will not be equal to the labor value of the commodity. Money plays a role not only in distributing surplus value, but also in exploiting labor, as workers and capitalists struggle over the level of money wages. The wage is a claim on a share of the labor embodied in commodities. Workers bargain over a money wage, not a bundle of commodities. Following the Smithian and classical school's long period approach, mobility of capital and labor ensures a tendency for market prices to move towards natural prices that will equalize the rate of profit on capital and also equalize the rate of exploitation of workers across employments. The profit rate is determined as net money revenues relative to money capital invested and is a portion of the surplus value which is realized in money form and created by unpaid labor power. This is extracted at the aggregate level and forms a social fund that is distributed among individual capitals through competition. The aggregate money surplus, what Minsky in 1992 called gross capital income, also supports other incomes such as rent, royalties, interest, commercial activities that do not generate surplus, and the financial sector, that is, interest and capital gains. It is the money price system that distributes the surplus among claimants. This presupposes a monetary production economy, for otherwise there'd be no way to distribute the surplus to equalize profit rates. The price system provides the signals that mobilize capital movements to ensure this tendency. Unlike the view of neoclassical economics, prices are not determined to equalize supply and demand, but to distribute a surplus in money terms that will tend to equalize the rate of profit. And that it seems a subtle, and for neoclassical folks, it's it's a meaning without a difference, but it is different. Similarly, money wages mobilize the movement of labor so that the rate of exploitation, which is the ratio of the money value of the surplus to the money wage, tends to equality across employments, rather than to equate the supply and demand in a so-called labor market. This makes money wages proportional to labor effort across all lines of production. While the wage is proportional to effort, it only rewards a part of the effort. The natural, that is, the long period price of commodities, is also proportional to labor effort. A proportion that fully labels MELT, that is, MELT, the monetary equivalent of labor effort. The ratio of MELT to the money wage is a measure of the degree of exploitation, which tends to equality across lines of production as commodity market prices tend to the natural prices. Hence, the same competitive processes that redistribute surplus value to equalize the rate of profit also tend to equalize the rate of exploitation. Labor effort and labor values are unobservable, but underlie the money wages, money prices, and money profits that are bases for decision. So there's something there, and it does peek out at the surface. In the Marxian approach, all the wages paid represent a claim on subsistence commodities equal to money's value multiplied by hours of paid labor in all production. Since the aggregate money value of subsistence commodities is equal to aggregate wages paid to produce them, plus non-wage costs and the money value of surplus labor, wages from producing other commodities must also be spent on subsistence commodities. And because the sum of the wage bill across all sectors only equals paid labor, the unpaid labor surplus cannot be realized without additional spending by unproductive labor and government. Foley argues that modern capitalism produces so much surplus, that is, the surplus value is larger than the money value of paid labor, that a large value of claims on the surplus can be supported, which can be thought of as a kind of overhead cost of capitalism. There are a number of similarities of this version of Marx to Keynes's approach, among which the following are the most important. As in Keynes's theory, there are two measuring units, that is, socially necessary labor time, or Keynes calls ordinary labor, and money value, that is, the wage unit. Capitalism is a monetary production economy driven by expectation of money profits. At the aggregate level, Keynes measures output as total paid labor hours, which is precisely Foley's interpretation of Marx. In both approaches, money's value is equal to the wage paid for an hour of average labor. Money is the sole external measure of value. So all that seems actually somewhat logical once you kind of disentangle, any other kind of constraints. Even though those constraints are what kind of change the nature of what we're talking about. Section 3, modern money theory. Modern money theory emphasizes the role of the state in the monetary system. As in Keynes' approach, money is the abstract unit of account in which credit and debt is denominated. The state chooses a money of account, imposes an obligation denominated in the money of account, that is, fines, fees, taxes, tribute, tithes, etc., names what is accepted in payment in the money of account, and if it issues liabilities, those are also payable in the money of account. In shorthand, modern money theory says that taxes drive money in the sense that the state's own liabilities, mostly currency plus central bank reserves denominated in the money of account, are acceptable in payment of taxes that are denominated in the same money of account. This creates a demand for the state's own obligations, that is, currency, bonds, central bank reserves that are redeemed in payment of liabilities, taxes, and so on to the state. Private monies also represent debt and credit denominated in the state's money of account. There's a hierarchy of monies, with the state's liabilities serving as the ultimate means of payment and clearing. Note, this is why Musk is doing what he's doing. Private monies are seen as deriving value from the state money system, with the state standing behind some of the private monies and enforcing contracts written in the state money of account. Principles of redemption also apply to private monies. For example, bank deposits are liabilities that are widely accepted because they can be used to make payments on bank loans, simultaneously redeeming both the bank and the borrower. MMT adopts the Marx, Veblen, Keynes view that the capitalist economy is a system based on monetary production, where money plays a more central role than it has in any previous economic system. However, modern money theory argues that money and state money long predates capitalism. The basic propositions about a sovereign currency hold for state money systems for the past 4,000 years at least. The typical story about an evolution from a primitive commodity money created as a medium of exchange to resolve the problem of a double coincidence of wants is rejected for both historical and logical reasons. Money has always been issued as a record of indebtedness and accepted in redemption of obligations. Money historically predates the existence of market exchange, probably by thousands of years, and indeed is a precondition for prices in monetary exchange. Now, in summary, modern money, MMT, emphasizes the state's money as the unit of measure of the value of obligations, the money of account. From inception, it is the measure of the obligation to the state, taxes, and so on. Currency is accepted because it is valuable in meeting the obligation imposed by the state. However, that raises two questions. How much demand for the currency can be created through tax obligations, and how much will the currency be worth? That is, what determines the value of money? If the state imposes tax obligations equal in the aggregate to $1 million payable in the state's own money, the population will accept at least $1 million in government spending of its own money so that taxes can be paid. In practice, government will probably be able to spend more, as the population will want to hoard some for future use. See savings. In addition, the state's money can be used in private transactions and legal tender laws, as well as court enforcement of payments made in the state's currency will increase demand. All of this would lead one to believe that the demand for the currency could be very much larger than the tax liability. However, it does not tell one directly what the currency will be worth in terms of purchasing power, even if the currency maintains parity in payment of obligations to the state, i.e., $1 can be redeemed in payment of $1 of tax. MMT has typically argued that money's value is determined by what one must do to obtain the currency that can be used to discharge the tax liability. This sounds much like Marx's labor theory of value, as well as Keynes's discussion of the value of labor determined in the wage unit. However, in the modern economy, people work for wages, including for the government. They produce and sell output, including to the government. They receive transfer payments, that is, Social Security, welfare, etc., own property that generates rents, realize capital gains on assets, and beg, borrow, and steal to obtain money that can be used to pay taxes and make other payments. Note also that people can avoid legally and evade illegally taxes. And today they rarely use currency to pay taxes. They usually use bank money. Most of their income and other sources of money to pay taxes also comes in the form of bank money. In some, there are many ways of obtaining the money needed to pay taxes, and little of the money used takes the form of currency. The value of money must be more complexly determined. Now, what if government wanted to stabilize the value of money relative to prices of a broad basket of goods and services? As both Keynes and Sraffa argued, indexes of prices are human. See, lost down here. In this correspondence, Keynes constructs an imperfect as well as a measure of aggregate price. Trying to fix an index price would be difficult and even counterproductive in a dynamic economy, as it would interfere with changing conditions of production, such as labor productivity, remuneration of different kinds of labor, and as well with changing consumer demand and mixes of final purchased product. However, put those concerns to the side for a moment and look at the possibility of stabilizing prices for a basket of consumption goods. Government typically purchases a relatively narrow range of output on a large scale: oil, other sources of energy, military hardware, and a range of services. Now, even if government moved toward a fixed price floating quantity model for such purposes, that would not stabilize money's value relative to the typical consumption basket. Stabilizing the price of the entire consumption basket would require operating across a broad range of outputs, many of which the government would not need. However, this can be done, for example, through the use of buffer stocks, that is, standing ready to buy and sell to stabilize prices, and has been done for agricultural commodities. Now, following the insights of both Marx and Keynes, it would make more sense to attempt to stabilize the value of money in terms of the wage unit. This is also consistent with other heterodox approaches that see the unit labor cost as a primary determinant of price. Labor is not homogeneous, but it's arguably more homogeneous than output. Government is a direct purchaser of a wide variety of labor, from relatively unskilled, that is, people who just joined the Army, new Army recruits, to highly skilled, for example, FDA researchers. And note, of course, what some people are trying to do to these people. However, trying to stabilize the remuneration for each type of labor is not necessary and probably not desired. It's to be very difficult to get relative wages and salaries just right to call forth the right proportions for each type of worker. Instead, government could set the base rate and stand ready to hire anyone who wants to work at that rate. Now, this is the idea behind Minsky's job guarantee. Market forces would then adjust to that rate, with wages for more skilled workers set at a multiple of the base rate. If government sets the job guarantee wage at $15 an hour, that becomes the effective minimum wage. The private sector, as well as the government itself, would pay more than that to attract the kinds of workers desired particular positions. In recessions, the workers who lose their jobs can get $15 an hour in the jobs guarantee program. In expansions, more workers would be pulled out of the JG program by offers above $15 an hour. In this way, the value of money is set equal to the wage rate paid for quote unquote ordinary labor, say $15 an hour. At the aggregate level, the total money value produced then equals the total value of hours paid labor, adjusted, as Keynes and Marx and Foley suggested, by quality. On the margin, $15 will buy an hour's worth of ordinary labor and maybe a half hour's worth of average labor, and much less time in the case of highly remunerated workers. The marginal value of money remain at $15 per hour of ordinary labor for as long as remains the job guaranteed wage. So Keynes argued that an alternative increasing unemployment had to be found to prevent wage pressures from feeding through to inflation. Minsky called it employer of last resort. Uh, Levy presents a simple model in which government buys labor and issues a currency that can be used to pay taxes, i.e., a tax credit, and in which there are also private purchases of labor. The outstanding stock of government money grows at a rate determined by the government's deficit. Government adopts a fixed wage job guarantee. And $15 would buy output weighted appropriately, keeping in mind that prices must redistribute surplus labor produced within an hour of ordinary labor. However, money's value will change in terms of output as the labor composition of output changes over time, even with a constant job guarantee wage. The minimum, of course, would now be $22 or $25. If the basket of consumption shifts toward output produced by less skilled labor, money's average value in terms of output increases. If the basket shifts towards output of skilled labor, money's value falls. In the second case, the purchasing power of the wage paid in the jobs guarantee program would fall relative to the price of the new subsistence basket of commodities. So long as the wage paid remains at $15 an hour, it's creating a disinflationary force. Note that this works even without unemployment. Anyone willing to work at the program wage would be able to get a job. To maintain purchasing power for ordinary labor, the money wage would need to be raised above $15. This would be a policy choice. Similarly, increasing government transfer payments or rising business style costs will reduce the purchasing power of the wage unit because a portion of output would need to be shifted to recipients of the transfers and profits need to be redistributed. A price index would record this as inflation, but it's not necessarily something that should be fought. Taxes can be used to release resources for government use, relieving inflation pressure, that is, the reduction of money's value. Imposing taxes in conjunction with transfer spending can reduce purchasing power of workers by reducing net wages to free up commodities for consumption by transfer recipients. Government does not need taxes to pay for spending, but needs to make way for its spending. Taxes on claimants to the surplus, that is, recipients of interest or rent, can also release commodities for consumption by transfer recipients, attenuating pressure on prices. Section 4, conclusion towards a revival of value theory. As discussed by Graeber, the mercantilists located wealth in precious metals. Physiocrats argued all social wealth was ultimately derived from agriculture. But Adam Smith drew on the moral tradition that argued instead that intrinsic value had to be based on its costs of production, which made labor the main source of value. Value was separate from price. However, the invisible hand guided by divine providence would push market prices towards the natural price, which in turn meant that people would indeed be justly rewarded for their labors. Marx took this up, arguing that the capitalist wage system turns human creativity itself into an abstraction that can be bought or sold, necessarily involving alienation, exploitation, and the destruction of what makes life meaningful or worthwhile. The neoclassical revolution against classical thought replaced the labor theory of value with the marginalist utility theory, where value is a purely subjective measure of individual desire. Value policy, but the private sector can pay any wage it wants using currency. Levy shows that so long as taxes are greater than zero, government's pricing for labor in the jobs guarantee will determine the value of money. It turns out that it is not important whether the government is the only seller of the currency, but only that it is the sole producer. Economics becomes an objective science of the study of price formation. Therefore, the neoclassical notion that the economy seeks a market clearing equilibrium is rejected by all versions of heterodoxy. However, much of the heterodox tradition also shuns discussion of value in favor of price. As alternative, an alternative theory of price formation is offered that emphasizes cost and profit and focuses on examining how firms actually set prices. Labor costs play an important role in price formation. However, as production takes the form of production of commodities by means of commodities, that's Traffa, there is a bit of an infinite regress as it is cost plus markup back through the stream of inputs. There are two heterodox traditions that do emphasize value, Marx's and Keynes's. Marx's approach, according to the interpretation adopted by Heilbronner, Foley, and Graeber, emphasizes the unique thing about capitalism is that it allowed labor to become an abstraction, turning labor power into a commodity that can be bought and sold. That commodity is the capacity to work. What makes this possible is the use of a specific symbolic medium of value, money. For Marx, money is a symbol. It represents the value or importance of labor. It can do so by incorporating it into a total market system, because for Marx, the real value of a product is not, as Ricardo claimed, how many hours went into making it, but the proportion of the total amount of labor in the entire economy that went into making it. This proportion can only be determined through the market, that is, through the use of money. Thus, value is tied up with money, but not directly with a commodity's price. Money is the only abstract measure of labor's value that one can observe. Now, while one can count labor hours, these hours are specific to the task to which they're employed. The price of a particular commodity produced by labor is not equal to its embodied labor value, as prices must redistribute surplus labor. Keynes's approach to measuring units, that is, money value and labor hours, is somewhat similar to Marx's as seen above. However, what is perhaps more important is that he brought values in the sense of morality back into non-Marxian economics. Keynes does not take wants as given, but rather wishes society might make its wants desirable wants, as Skidelsky argued. Keynes believed that to make the world ethically better was the only justifiable purpose of economic striving. Keynes saw capitalism as a necessary stage to get societies from poverty to abundance, after which its usefulness would disappear. Following Moore, Keynes believed that good is objective. People know what is good, and that which is to be maximized is not happiness or pleasure, but goodness. Note, however, that neither the wage rate or that either the wage rate or the rate of profit must be taken as given outside the system to find the prices of production. Keynes's view was that the love of money is a neurosis to be tolerated only until people achieve the abundance that would allow society to realize the economic possibilities for our grandchildren. As Graeber puts it, in this sense of the term, values are conceptions of the desirable, ideas about what people ought to want. The important point is that both Marx and Keynes saw the immorality of capitalism as a system that pursues profit above all else. In Keynes's theory, the result is unemployment and excessive inequality, also instability, as Minsky argued, both attributed to the use of money. Now, in Marx, it is the result of the exploitation of labor, that is, unpaid labor time. Graeber argues that Marx did not propose a labor theory of value mainly as a way to explain price fluctuations, but as a way of connecting economic theory with broader moral and philosophical concerns. For Marx, labor was more or less identical with human creativity. The unique thing about capitalism, Marx held, was that it allowed labor to become an abstraction. This was because capitalism turns labor into a commodity, something that can be bought or sold, and what an employer who hires the laborer buys is an abstraction, that laborer's capacity to work. What makes this possible is the use of a specific symbolic medium of value, that is, money. Money is fetishized as wage laborers only go to work in order to get money, and capitalists only hire them to get more money. As Keynes put it, they have no other desire in the world. The economic system itself values the money token, not the ability to satisfy human needs. Now, how can the heterodox approaches that derive from Keynes's thought be synthesized with the Marxian approach? This is the whole business of doing any of this. Wages owed are denominated in the state's money of account, as are commodity prices. Payment of money clears the wage obligation to workers. Money received, that's wages, represents a claim ticket on commodities redeemed for subsistence consumption. If this analysis is expanded to include private money, This too takes the form of credits and debits denominated in the money of account. Banks advance money in the form of deposits to firms to pay wages and other costs as they produce commodities for sale. Receipts allow firms to meet their obligations to banks by redeeming bank money. Market prices determine the quantity of money for which commodities can be exchanged at a point in time. But in the long period, they approach natural prices that equalize profit rates and rates of exploitation across commodities. There is thus a proportion between labor hours and money, what Foley terms MELT, MELT, the monetary equivalent of ordinary labor time. The state can be brought into the analysis to not only choose the money of account and issue currency redeemable for obligations to the state, but also to issue the ultimate money for clearing of private monetary obligations, that is, the obligations of one bank to another. MMT can also bring in political economy aspects of the state's role in primitive accumulation, division of labor, etc., wage labor and markets. This helps to resolve the problems of the usual approach to money identified by Levine, imagining a pre-existing market economy based on commodity exchange, but without money. In the approach favored by many MMT proponents, money was there in the very beginning, before specialization, before wage labor, before markets. This view also fits the facts and has the advantage that it can explain the existence of money before capitalism. Money clearly predates commodity production. This resolves the beaver and deer problems in Smith's exposition of exchange. He supposes that if it takes twice as much labor to kill a beaver as it does to kill a deer, a beer, then one beaver should naturally exchange for and be worth a deer. As Heilbronner argues, Smith takes it for granted that there are at least two pre-existing conditions. That is, individuals want to or need to maximize value in exchange. But outside a capitalist system, why should this be so? Certainly is not true of many observed pre-capitalist societies where exchange was customarily undertaken on a very unequal and even competitive basis to force the counterparty to get the better side of a trade. Second, it presumes that there is a disutility in labor. While there's certainly a lot of unenjoyable ways to labor in a capitalist society, why wouldn't hunting be an enjoyable pursuit in what Smith called a nation of hunters? And even if there's some disutility involved, there's no reason to suppose that hunting beaver and deer require the same undesired effort for each time period. Finally, as discussed above, the value of labor is not determined at the individual level, but at the level of the economy as a whole. For Marx, the real level of a product is not, as Ricardo claimed, how many hours of work went into making it, but the proportion of the total amount of labor in the entire economy that went into making it. This is the difference between abstract labor, that is for the economy as a whole, and concrete labor, that is hunting deer. Commodities do not exchange on the basis of concrete labor hours, but are rather sold for money that represents a claim ticket on an abstract labor power. MMT, modern money theory, also argues that one should have the state in the picture from the very beginning. Actually, it does when you consider hunting licenses. But anyway, it creates a money account, imposes obligations, and issues the currency that can be used to pay those obligations. You know, your deer tag or whatever. In this way, one does not have to imagine the operation of a capitalist economy without a state, and then add the state and its currency to a pre-existing stateless system. There is no capitalism without a state that chooses the abstract measure of general value, the money of account. There is no capitalism without a state that provides a legal framework, that enforces contracts, that provides the institutional framework within which capitalism functions. This does not mean that the state dominates or operates separately from capitalist relations, but rather that it plays a socio-political role that goes beyond spending and taxing. Horstaeder highlights Marx's views on the role of the state's taxes played in primitive accumulation and in monetizing labor power in economies. So I suppose the conclusion is not as fun as one would like, but I think the ultimate goal is that it requires the state to still arbitrate all of these matters, and it is against the kind of neoliberal tendency to deregulate and to create all kinds of other monkey business, which is what we're currently in, the chaos that is being created by various oligarchs, is simply a means to create sow confusion and not necessarily to generate more state power, but rather to, as certain capitalists want to do, is to deconstruct the administrative state and hence provide a wider terrain on which to profit, which is ultimately the goal. And it's quite naked actually, or very naked when you see what's going on, um, and certainly preying on a lot of stupidity. Certainly. Anyway, deer and beer nuts. Thank you very much. Uh, Deer nuts are under a buck. Ah, that's very funny. That sounds like a hunter joke. Uh, anyway, that being said, and I've run out of time, let me close up shop and stop the live stream. Thank you very